Young Justice is a 2010 American animated television series detailing the lives and exploits of a bunch of superhero sidekicks who form their own team underneath the famous Justice League as a covert ops unit. It ran for a full season and was very well received, at least enough to get a second full season subtitled Invasion. After it underperformed, the series was tentatively cancelled in 2013. However, the series was later revived thanks to the prominence of streaming services, and a third season subtitled Outsiders was released in 2 half-season installments. Each season follows the team, referred to as such, as they and the Justice League battle against various cabals of sinister individuals who want to take over the world, namely the Light, which is a group of Earthborn supervillains including Lex Luthor, Vandal Savage, and Ra's al Ghul, and their partners the Reach in Season 2, a sinister race of aliens who have a habit of taking over planets without the planets themselves even knowing it. In many ways, Young Justice follows in the style, though it came before, of the vastly popular DC superhero shows over on the CW, with around 20-episode seasons of mostly episodic villain of the week stories that ultimately culminate in a big season finale, where a bunch of plot threads intersect and implode in on each other, hopefully in a satisfying way. Before I go into my big deep dives into each season, I'll warn you that I'm going to be spoiling a lot of stuff. While I think that story spoilers are almost superfluous, I think a spoiler warning for continuity nods and character development is very much warranted, and if you have an interest in watching the show, I would click off now. To go over my general thoughts before I start the spoiling, I think that the first season is one of my favorite seasons of Western TV I've ever watched. Season 2 is a bit more rocky but still pretty good, and Season 3 is a great return to form, albeit while shelving some of its earlier storylines before they could have satisfying payoffs, as well as being the worst paced of the 3. Because of various quirks and factors, each season feels very different from each other, so I'm going to be discussing each of them separately, including the casts and the plots, and we'll have a lot to talk about with the former, as the characters are the lifeblood of Young Justice. With all that said, let's jump right into Season 1. Lightning in a Bottle. In many ways, Young Justice's first season shouldn't work as well as it does. With such a large cast of characters continually adding more to the roster and with so many moving parts, 20 minutes per episode simply shouldn't be enough to satisfy audiences, and yet, it is. A lot of this is down to how efficient and strangely utilitarian a lot of the show comes across as. Scenes only ever display exactly what they intend with absolutely zero filler, and action scenes are over in the blink of an eye, especially ones that aren't the big episode finale. Season 1 is definitely the most episodic of the entire show, and my personal values seem to conflict with what's supposed to happen. I like serialized series more, ones that follow a long-form, single narrative, and yet this is my favorite season. I think all of that is down to the characters, which are at their strongest in this season by a very wide margin. Every single one of the 6 core members of the team is likable and relatable. While some are more outlandish than others, each has a very defined personality, role within the team, and for those that don't, they make that aspect of them a plot point. Every member gets an early episode to shine and focus on what makes them tick, which greatly helps in the audience getting used to their presence. And while each member doesn't do or say all that much in any given episode, seeing how efficiently the team comes to work together and seeing the smaller interactions between them helps sell the growing bond and cohesion as a unit, until they've become like a family to each other. To start with who is the closest thing to a main character the series has as a whole, we have Dick Grayson as Robin and later Nightwing. His personality changes drastically between each season, largely due to the circumstances he finds himself in each, but for now he's the kid brother of the group, though an odd one. Even though he's the youngest of the team by a fairly wide margin at only 13 years old, he's been a part of the superhero life the longest. This leads to some early drama where he believes that he ought to be the team's leader due to his experience, and his young age and slight petulance makes him jealous when the actual leader, Aqualad, gets more attention than him. He shares a strong bond with Kid Flash, who is the only one of the team who knows his secret identity, and shares a connection with 6th Ranger Artemis, as they're the only members of the team that don't have any superpowers, instead relying on their wit and their tech to keep up and contribute. One of his quirks is his habit of taking words like overwhelmed and taking off the supposed prefix, resulting in a new word, whelmed, which is to say just underwhelmed enough to not be overwhelmed into an action. These become the team's own little language, a dictionary, if you will, and no, I can't take credit for that joke, with them telling newbies to stay whelmed, and other things such as aster being the opposite of disaster, chalant being the opposite of nonchalant, and turbed being the opposite of disturbed. His role in the team is that of a planner and hacker, of which he has been trained to do both by Batman. More importantly, as stated before, he's the kid brother. When Superboy Superboy gets his ass handed to him in a sparring match, Robin is the fastest to laugh at his expense, as an example.
Good block. But did anyone see what he did wrong?
Ooh, he hit on teacher and got served? Dude!
As well, he's perhaps the most obvious, aside from Kid Flash with Miss Martian, with his crush on Zatanna. That said, he never becomes obnoxious in his immaturity. While he is childish around friends, when the time comes to focus on the mission, he's usually the first to do so as well, and is often the second person the team defers to if Aqualad isn't available. Such as when Artemis, his senior by age, was freaking out and he had to get her under control so that they could free the rest of the team who had been captured. Much of Dick's likability stems from his voice actor, Jesse McCartney, otherwise known as Roxas and not Roxas from the Kingdom Hearts series. McCartney simply is Dick Grayson, and his voice changes as the character grows older, while retaining the same easygoing and boyish charm that made it my favorite voice for the character in the first place. The leader of the team is Aqualad, who is for all intents and purposes an original creation, despite sharing a superhero name with an existing character. In the comics, Aqualad was traditionally the alias of a young Garth, an Atlantean who eventually took on the name Tempest. In Young Justice, the Aqualad mantle was instead taken by an Atlantean known as Calder, or just Calder. Aqualad isn't the strongest, fastest, or smartest of the team, but he's the one who speaks most plainly, is the oldest, and the most dependable of the original members, all of which helps him in commanding their respect and giving out clear and concise orders during missions, a trait which Robin gains in later seasons when he takes charge. Calder is perhaps one of the weaker members of the original team for me, if only because his down-to-earth demeanor doesn't leave a lot of room for emotional expression, and he's the only character who isn't involved in a budding romance with another team member. Instead, his romantic interest is a girl from Atlantis named Tula, who only appears in one episode and is already taken by Garth anyway. That said, Calder is far from a bad character, and in fact, despite not having the most broad emotional range or as much time devoted to him, I actually tended to like his standout episodes more than Superboy's and Miss Martian's. Since he's the dependable one, his episodes don't have as many complications when it comes to whatever mission he's on, leaving more room for the people around him to shine. And when Calder does emote in the few times he loses his cool or has to take charge forcibly, it's always great, and Carrie Payton, of Cyborg fame among other notable roles such as, I guess, in The Walking Dead, ? Anyway, he really sells the role.
Did he really think you or I could have been the mole?
We've known each other for years.
Trust is a two-way street, and you know they'd hate it if we kept secrets from them. Not that we'd do that. Never.
Enough! Captain Marvel has been captured, and we must act as a team to save him.
Under your leadership? I don't think so.
This is not up for debate. You all chose me to lead. When the mission is over, if you wish to select a new leader, I will happily step down. But until that time, I am in command here.
Of note are the episodes where he returns to Atlantis and teams up with Garth, where he goes off the book and aids in Roy Harper's investigation, and when news that he knew of a mole within the team gets out, an episode sees him having to earn back their respect to successfully complete a mission. Calder goes through perhaps the biggest changes between both Season 1 and Season 2, and between Season 2 and Season 3, but we'll get into those as we get into those seasons. All I'll say for now is that while the transitions are rocky, I think Calder remains a good character from start to finish. The last of the three original members is Kid Flash, the Wally West incarnation. In this canon, his recreation of Barry Allen's accident was messed up, and while he has super speed, he can only run close to supersonic speeds, though keep in mind that all superheroes have been relatively depowered in this canon. I don't even think the Flash is able to travel through time, as an example. He's the jokester, and the one most likely to have a smile on his face when he's running around fighting bad guys. He has a personal connection with Dick and Calder, having known them due to their mentors working closely together as part of the Justice League. And it's this three-man team that makes the initial decision to go behind the Justice League's back and uncover the cloning shenanigans that led to the formation of the team. Despite his jokey exterior, this Wally West serves as something of the heart of the series, and he always stood out to me as the most human with the most human problems. Helped a lot by the issues he faces in Season 2. But even in Season 1, one of my favorite episodes was Cold Hearted, which saw Wally being tasked with running a heart from one side of the country to the other to save the young ruler of Vladova, Perdita, as if she dies, the position goes to the sinister villain Count Vertigo. It shows us all of the good and bad with Wally, his annoying infatuation with Miss Martian, and his tendency to be short-sighted and only think things through close to the 11th hour for the negative. But it also shows us how heroic he is. While clearly annoyed at being excluded from fighting alongside the Justice League, he doesn't really voice his complaints, and we get to see him flex his tactical mind toward the end, where he uses the lie that he was told, that the girl died before he arrived, to trick Vertigo into believing the same thing thing, prompting him to reveal his entire plan in front of the alive and well Perdita, which causes her to revoke his diplomatic immunity and get him thrown into prison. Wally West and Artemis's relationship is also a point I want to talk about, but not before introducing the second part of that pairing, so just keep that in mind for a bit later. Next on the list is Superboy, who goes by Connor Kent. Like Calder, he is for all intents and purposes an original character. While he shares a similar backstory to the comic Superboy, he's something of a rage monster as opposed to the jokester that the comic version is. Connor is a character that I don't have particularly strong feelings about, even though I will acknowledge that objectively speaking, he is a good character. I liked him alright in Season 1, where his use of artificial performance enhancers known as shields was an interesting concept and source of drama, but he fell off pretty hard for me come Season 2. However, Schooled is one of my favorite episodes, and his tendency to both name everything obviously, a pet wolf is named Wolf, and an alien sphere machine is named Sphere, and his hatred of monkeys are fun gimmicks. In many ways, the most interesting thing about Connor is his relationship with the other members of the team, namely the girls, who both swoon over him. An absolutely adorable scene happens in Denial where, because of their mutual crush on Superboy, both Artemis and Miss Martian try to hook the other up with different members of the team, before laughing it off after making fun of an oblivious Wally.
Calder's, nice, don't you think? Handsome, commanding. You should totally ask him out.
He's like a big brother to me. But you know who would make the cutest couple? You and Wally. You're so full of passion, and he's so full of
It?
While I'm on the topic of romance, and before I delve into some of them, I will say that I'm glad that romantic subplots don't take up half of the runtime. To me, the single biggest issue with, like, every single CW DC show is that their only solution to filling time with such a large cast is continually having awkward and superfluous romantic subplots that go nowhere. And while Young Justice has characters who are interested in each other, and romance is a part of it, these are horny and impulsive teenagers after all, it's far from the main focus. The closest we get to a full-on subplot is some relationship drama between Superboy and Miss Martian in Season 2, and it's almost entirely used to show the dark place that the latter has gone in the time skip and to further her character, so I give it a pass. Anyway, number 5 happens to be Miss Martian. Mcgann, or Mcgann in human circles, is my least favorite member of the original cast. While, again, I wouldn't call her bad by any stretch, I personally found her emotional hangups and her arc a bit boring. Her rivalry with Simon was kinda half-baked at times, and she was so often the bubbly, energetic one that anytime she tried to be serious came off as kinda strange to me. Sometimes it worked, such as with Failsafe. Other times, not so much. Maybe it was because she reminded me too much of Starfire from Teen Titans, I don't know. But even that character has some great dramatic moments, such as the whole Trocky thing and, other stuff. But like I said, she's not bad by any stretch, and the development she gets in the first half of Season 2 is some of my favorite character work done in that season. But in Season 1, look, it isn't that she doesn't get an arc. Dick actually has less of one, but I don't know, I legitimately can't think of a logical reason that I liked her less. Granted, I've never really liked telepath characters, but then a lot of the reasons I don't like them aren't present here. For example, a lot of the time, other shows or movies forget a telepath is a telepath when it's convenient for them. But one of Young Justice's main strengths throughout its runtime is that it remains extremely consistent on the rules that the characters have to follow, and retains very strong continuity between episodes, especially in Season 1, which I found to be the most bingeable of the seasons. To this end, the mind link between the team, courtesy of Miss Martian, eventually becomes so ubiquitous and natural to the original 6 that they have to be reminded that it's extremely rude to leave out anyone who notices and is in the same room as them.
Do the rest of you get the impression we're still on probation with Zatanna?
Not just Zatanna. I mean, why is Marvel still hanging around?
Because we like having him around.
You like having him around because he waits on you hand and foot.
And your point is?
It almost makes one nostalgic for Red Tornado's tenure as our supervisor.
Yeah, at least he trusted us.
If you ignore the fact we shouldn't have trusted him, he was a traitor. That machine nearly got all of us killed.
Are you guys having a psychic conversation? Because I can't decide if that's cool or really rude.
It's this natural team cohesion that makes the original cast of 6 members so strong as characters. Even my favorite, who we're about to talk about, is far from the deepest or most interesting character on their own, but it's how complete they feel when working together that they really shine. To that end, what I've discussed prior is all meaningless, as the real meat of what these characters are about is defined by their connection to each other and other members of the superhero community. Before I get to that, I want to quickly go over our resident 6th Ranger, Artemis. She's introduced as Green Arrow's newest protege and is clearly the outsider of the group when compared to how tight-knit everyone had already become, even by just episode 6. Her main struggle is in trying to prove to herself and to the team that she belongs there, as, spoilers, she's the daughter of the villain Sportsmaster, the former villain Huntress, and is the sister of the villain Cheshire. She fled her villainous family in the hopes of breaking the chain and becoming a hero, but it's due to her past that she inadvertently keeps herself at arm's length from the rest of the team, which is pointed out several times to remain true even as they all grow closer over the course of the season. As for why she's my favorite of the original 6, it's how understandable and personal her particular secret is, as well as how it's used. Artemis would rather sabotage a mission than reveal her secret, which puts her into some of the more morally gray conflicts in the first season. As well, Homefront is largely an Artemis episode and is one of my favorites. And finally, I mean, come on, she's got the best body in the series. What can I say? I'm a sucker for dark-skinned blondes, like Fran from Final Fantasy XII, female swimmers from Pokemon X and Y, Artemis, and, now that I look at him, Calder isn't the worst-looking guy I've ever seen, and Season 3 confirms him to be bi. On a more serious note, I'm going to use Artemis as a jumping off point to go back to my previous point about team cohesion and such by discussing how she and Wally West constantly bicker and argue throughout the entirety of the first season. I actually find their strained relationship in the first season a really interesting example and case study of bias used correctly in fiction. Biases exist and can unfairly sway our opinions about certain things regardless of what's rational. For example, I'm not a fan of Miss Martian's Season 3 redesign, even though I'm fully aware of the progress it shows her character having made throughout the series, simply because I don't like that pure white skin tone. Sometimes humans aren't rational. Sorry. Likewise, Wally West has an immediate aversion to Artemis because he saw her as not only a replacement, but the main reason for Roy Harper, aka Speedy, aka Red Arrow, aka the original trio's number 4 who bailed on the whole team thing in a fit of petulant rage, not joining the team even after they've become a successful unit. Meanwhile, his bad attitude toward her immediately puts Artemis off from getting to know him, and from there, each is instantly at each other's throat. Artemis has a sharp tongue to match Wally's quick brain, and they take almost every opportunity they can to get a dig at the other. But that isn't to say they don't like each other or trust each other. We see several times throughout the season of how well they can work together and how much they care for the other when they let themselves see past their biases. In Failsafe, Wally is the most distraught at seeing Artemis' supposed death, and in the next episode where they discuss the events that happened, both categorically deny the clear feelings they showed for each other within that episode. In Bereft, the team gets their memories wiped of the last 6 months, and while Wally and Artemis are working together, they get along great and even flirt with each other, only to immediately go back to arguing when they get their memories back. In Insecurity, when Artemis is visibly upset by having Red Arrow join and potentially take her place on the team, it's Wally that assures her privately that she's earned her place as much as anyone, only to immediately jump down her throat when it's revealed that she had misled them and ruined the mission for personal reasons. And finally, when all of their barriers are down, all of their secrets are out, and they legitimately have no actual reason to not like each other, they are all too eager to consummate a relationship and kiss right there after a successful mission. We have these characters who are by all accounts a perfect match in personality, though not in skill set, whose potential friendship, let alone the possibility of a relationship, was immediately sabotaged by circumstance which led to an immense personal bias on both of their accounts, and it was only with time and honesty that they were able to overcome that. And I think that's really nice. The relationship is unfortunately the only one that lasts through to season 2, despite both Superboy and Miss Martian and Robin and Zatanna hooking up by the end of season 1. After gushing about my favorite character and relationship, let's go back to my general points about cohesion. We've already seen how the show can use character relationships to explore ideas, as we saw with Artemis and Wally and exploring how bias affects us. But I don't think people realize just how deeply this rabbit hole goes. Think about it. This is a team of teen superheroes whose entire existences are predicated on their connection to another hero. They were sidekicks before they joined the team. Right there, that serves two functions. reasons. First, for those that don't know about Miss Martian, or especially Artemis and this new Aqualad, it provides the audience a baseline of what to generally expect from their power set, which is important for a superhero show. Second, it provides us with an understandable history. Each of them were proteges to another hero and eventually met and joined the team. The circumstances for each are different, but it does provide that precedent. Things go further when you realize that every single one of these characters is so interconnected to each other that it becomes difficult to parse. You simply can't discuss Miss Martian's growth without talking about how Superboy affects it. Much of Artemis's angst over her family history is her worrying about how specifically Wally will react, and her place on the team is seen as being in direct competition with Roy Harper's place, both by the team and herself. She and Robin form a strong bond that lasts through each season due to them being the only non-powered members. Robin, Kate Flash, and Aqualad are all close friends before the series even starts. Wally even knows Robin's secret identity, which he doesn't reveal to the other members until later seasons. And the connections spread further out to the rest of the cast as well. Artemis obviously has her connection to both Sportsmaster and Cheshire, who serve as semi-regular adversaries for the team, and especially Roy Harper. The others obviously have their connections to their mentors and family. Calder has his relationships with both Tula and Garth in Atlantis, along with who is revealed to be his biological father, the villain Black Manta. Superboy is the half-clone of Superman, yes, but he's also half Lex Luthor, and the two form a twisted and one-sided father-son relationship, with Luthor developing shields that suppress Connor's human DNA and gives him all of Superman's powers for a limited time, hoping to sway Connor to his side, unsuccessfully. The result of this interconnectedness is about sevenfold, but for now the important thing to understand is that it makes this world feel real and believable. Unlike something like Teen Titans, these characters have relationships with people outside of their surrogate family in the team, and they have things that drive them that are explored through these relationships. Calder feels somewhat conflicted over his getting to be Aqualad rather than his friend Garth, and it gives us another angle to tackle the, if not origin, the surprising amount of self-confidence issues that only gets resolved as he asserts himself more as a leader. Miss Martian is actually a white Martian and is extremely paranoid about anyone finding out due to Martian racism and that her natural form appears monstrous to a human. And one of the reasons her and Superboy are so close is that he's the first to know about her true form, but is both respectful and emotionally mature enough to not tell her, but rather let her tell him and the others on her own terms, rather than forcing it on her. And it's not like it's just relationship drama either. The episode Secrets is about an impromptu mission where Zatanna joins Artemis as she tries to get over Superboy, leading them to confront the villainous Harm, and their friendship persists throughout the rest of the season. And the end of season 3, but whatever. I also mentioned Homefront, which sees Robin and Artemis having to work together to save the others, where Artemis is slowly falling into a panic attack and Robin has to calm her down. Artemis also has a strange relationship with her mother and is a school friend of Dick Grayson, not knowing that he's actually Robin. When Roy Harper needs help, he immediately goes to Aqualad, and the two have their own mission together. Overall, I think one of Young Justice's biggest strengths in its first season is how it can seamlessly pair off characters and just have that be interesting. Artemis and Robin in Homefront, Miss Martian and Superboy, and Artemis and Kid Flash in Bereft, Zatanna and Artemis in Secrets, Aqualad and Red Arrow in Targets, I could continue. This can be taken to an even more logical extreme with whole episodes focusing on a single character. Episodes 3 through 8 are character-focused episodes zeroing in on a different member of the team. One of my favorites being Schooled, which focuses on Superboy. Cold Hearted is one I've already mentioned that focuses on Kid Flash. Failsafe is pretty much seeing Miss Martian slowly breaking down as all of her friends keep dying in front of her, and the follow-up episode, Disordered, spent a fair amount of its runtime with Black Canary counseling the team one-on-one to discuss their personal experiences and hang-ups, with Robin's especially being interesting. The rest is a Superboy episode, which is also good. These pairings and solo character episodes not only let us see different sides of each character as they interact with different people of different stations and different ages, but also lets us have much needed time away from other characters. If they tried to give every character equal screen time in every episode, the show would be an absolute mess. But by sectioning off whole episodes to highlight one or two of them, it lets each of the characters shine in a way that hasn't been replicated by the series since. The other best thing Young Justice does, and this is at least partially true in later seasons, is just how well continuity is preserved and how important it is, and it goes all the way from the micro to the macro scale. At its core, the story is an espionage plot, where you have a covert ops team trying to take down an equally shadowy organization led by a cabal of villains, and all parties just happen to be super. Due to the nature of these stories, the end of each season or arc tends to either start or end with a major recap of events, with lots of flashbacks and explanations for how everything fits together, to mixed results. For now, I'm just stating facts. Going a bit further down, we have several plot threads that are dealt with in small bursts at a time, usually only one episode. But what's cool is that an effort was made to explain or justify the time between each of these episodes, as in-universe, there's usually at least a week's gap between them, if not more. For example, Red Tornado betrays the team and leaves with his brethren in Homefront, and that plot is put on the back burner until the episode Humanity, where the impetus for the team going against orders and searching for Red Tornado themselves is because not only was the League unsuccessful in locating him in the intervening weeks, but the team are also all collectively fed up with how secretive the League is being about the whole thing, even after all the time Red Tornado spent with them and with how long he's been missing. Going down even further, we have smaller things happening and then being relevant later. One of Wally West's quirks is that he collects a souvenir from every mission. In episode 5, that souvenir is the mystery arrow that saved the day, that we later learn came from Artemis, who was watching them from the shadows. Later, in Homefront, Artemis finds that arrow in Wally's collection, and it ends up being pivotal in subduing the Reds and freeing the rest of the team. And now even further to small things that don't end up mattering, but is still nice and is used to show character. Robin introduces the term whelmed and the phrase feeling the aster, which the rest of the team adopts. It's later Zatanna's unprompted use of this convention, taking off the non-existent prefix of words, that tells the audience that the two have the potential to be compatible. The results of all of this continuity and attention to detail is that the show is extremely rewarding to those who pay attention, which is a plus for me since I do that anyway. It also makes the show extremely bingeable, as you get this growing mental checklist of things that can potentially come back, and whenever one does, it's always fun and fulfilling, making you crave more and more. To quickly go over the other important characters, there are 3. The first of which is Red Tornado, who acts as the team's den mother between missions for much of the show's first season, as the oldest of the team biologically is 16 during season 1, and the Justice League would be incredibly irresponsible to just let them live on their own. As a character, Red Tornado is fine. He's probably the least interesting den mother the team gets, with others like Black Canary and Shazam being much more likable and relatable. He has the usual robot arc of trying to understand and act more human, and it's fine but unimpressive, though his speech to the other Reds is top tier. It is so inspiring. However, in keeping with the theme of the show, it's his connection to the other Reds and the genuine bond he forms with the team that salvages what would otherwise be a pretty nothing character, so, I gave him a pass. Plus, it's a nice touch that after all of the Red business, he goes to his creator, who is on his deathbed, and opts to take care of him until that time comes, which that's just a nice closure to his arc, isn't it? The second character is Zatanna, who joins the team in the latter half of the season after being introduced and subsequently kidnapped by them in their quest to find Red Tornado after he betrays them. While I really liked Zatanna in season 1, she suffers from majorly falling off in later seasons, which I'll briefly go into when I talk about those episodes, but for now, she's spunky, playful, and compassionate. While she's far from deep as a character, Zatanna's main personal conflict of dealing with what is essentially the death of her father, when his body is inhabited by the spirit Nabu, is a fittingly somber turn for the character, and it's hard to imagine her coping in a healthy way if she didn't have the rest of the team by her side. While some may find the romantic tension between her and Robin to be a bit forced, I disagree. I already mentioned the subtle ways that they're shown to be compatible, but there are other small moments as well, such as his pointed concern for her during their battle against Red Volcano, and how he was the last one to leave when she moved into the cave after her father's possession. At worst, I would say that I would have liked to see them develop past their casual flirting, but a lot of that is the fault of season 2, not this one, where at most they share is a single kiss. Last is Red Arrow, formerly known as Speedy, and I'm discussing him last because a lot of his character is heavy spoilers for the first and second seasons, so be prepared for that. So Young Justice's first season has 2 larger plots, discovering and then making moves against the light, and that there's a mole within the team. The former isn't relevant here, but the latter very much is, as it's revealed that Red Arrow, aka Roy Harper, and later changing his name to Will Harper, was the mole. He was not only a sleeper agent, but was also a clone of the original Roy Harper, who was programmed to do whatever he could to join the Justice League. And after that was accomplished, he implanted each of them with mind control devices to have the light take take over. When his mission was accomplished, he regained his own mind and was horrified at what he's done, and from there joins the team in earnest to bring the Justice League back from the brink. A lot of Red Arrow's character is defined by how angry and fiercely independent he is. Instead of joining the team when offered, he struck out on his own as a freelance vigilante, taking on villains such as Sportsmaster, Cheshire, who develops an interest in him, and even Ra's al Ghul. Eventually, he was told that he would be inducted into the Justice League, but was told that he should join the team while the minutiae is worked out by the League, during which he comes to blows with Artemis as the mole mystery thickens. I'll admit that I'm not the biggest fan of Red Arrow as he appears in Season 1. A lot of his scenes are just him stoically going about a job, but he becomes much more interesting, if more irritating, when he interacts with the team. His rivalry with Artemis is entertainingly antagonistic, especially since he doesn't buy her cover of being Green Arrow's niece for a second. As well, as I've mentioned plenty of times before, he also has that one episode where he teams up with Aqualad. Red Arrow is one of the few characters to actually get better as the show goes on, and his development stands out to me as the most natural between each of the 3 seasons. From angry and hot-headed in Season 1, to remorseful and obsessed in Season 2, to slightly insecure but overall well-adjusted in Season 3, as he finally settles down and finds a stable state of mind. Likewise, his relationships with both Artemis and Cheshire are extremely interesting. Cheshire forms a kind of Catwoman-esque relationship, though with the power dynamics reversed, with the male hero being on the back foot, rather than the sexy villainess, as is often seen with Batman and Catwoman, since, Batman. Unfortunately, I don't think their story got a very satisfying conclusion, if it's even over, in Season 3. But again, that's not Season 1's fault. Even more so than Artemis and Wally, and about on par with Connor and Mcgann, Artemis and Red Arrow's relationship is the one with the most focus and development over the course of each season, though it's almost entirely in Seasons 1 and 3 where they interact the most. Anyway, seeing it change and mold to accommodate for their advancing ages and changes in lifestyle and circumstance is very fun and interesting. If there was a fault within Season 1, it would be due to the episodic nature. After a certain point, it can feel tiring to start an episode on a mission, have another climax on the end of the episode, and then repeat the cycle ad nauseum. For the most part, Season 1 avoids this trap, but it can occasionally still fall into it. Namely with Failsafe, which is so bonkers that the next episode is just a slog to get through sometimes. As well, while it can mostly be excused for being on a TV budget in 2010, the show isn't the most polished when it comes to the visuals. Each episode even has a list of animation goofs on the fan wiki if you're interested. However, in many ways, the first season of Young Justice feels like it's lightning trapped in a bottle. A perfect storm of creative fervor, minimal studio tampering, and a solid production. As I said at the beginning, it's one of my favorite seasons ever of Western TV, and I can safely say that if you decide to watch it, you'll find at least something to like. So, did lightning strike twice for Season 2? Well, lightning can't strike twice. Season 2, subtitled Invasion, starts out really bad. I don't know what the impetus for this was, whether the time gap was covered in comics or what, but for some reason, they decided to jump ahead 5 whole years into the future for this season. This is one of the 3 biggest writing mistakes of the season. And yes, I said 3. Having a time skip isn't a bad idea, especially for shows starring younger characters, as we can see them start to take roles in a larger society after maturing through the pre-time skip stories. But 5 years? Really? You think that's enough time, guys? Nothing about the state of the world justifies this massive leap forward, and I honestly can't fathom a satisfying reason for the decision, and I can't defend it at all. To go over the results of the skip, the status quo has changed. No longer is the team made up of a ragtag group of young heroes who have a rebellious side. They have fully converted into a militaristic covert ops unit, which sucks a lot of the humanity from every member, as they just always do as they're told. Most of the old cast's place in the world has shifted so drastically that they might as well be completely different characters. Miss Martian acts completely different, Nightwing, formerly Robin, acts completely different, Aqualad is now a villain, Artemis and Kid Flash have retired from superheroics altogether, Zatanna and 11th Hour Ranger Rocket have graduated into the Justice League and barely have 10 lines in the whole season combined between them, and this makes the only one who feels like a semi-natural evolution, Superboy, who has matured past his rage monster status for the most part and is now one of the senior members of the team. The team itself is almost completely unrecognizable. In season 1, you had 6 core members, adding up to 9 with later episodes with the main cast, Zatanna, Red Arrow, and then Rocket. Starting out in Invasion, you have 10 to start, and by the end, there are 13 members. More than double what we started with. Only 3 are returning. Superboy, Miss Martian, and Nightwing, formerly Robin, though he is mostly just an advisor and doesn't usually go out on the missions. Only one of the new faces was properly introduced in season 1, Beast Boy pre-mutation. But his superpowers and tragic past leading to his induction happened between seasons, so don't worry, he might as well be completely different too. Now to clarify, adding new members is not a bad idea at all, and expanding the cast is par for the course of a continued series, but most of the time, the cast is expanded in real time, of naturally introducing new characters and having them slowly become a part of the main cast, like we had with Zatanna in season 1. It's writing suicide to shake up things so utterly like this. 7 new characters to keep track of from the start. We'll get into how Invasion handles them in a second, but for now, we'll move on to point number 3. The main conflict of the entire season comes out of nowhere. Suddenly, aliens are invading the Earth. Why? Now, aliens aren't a new phenomenon, see Martian Manhunter and a little guy you might have heard of called Superman, but these no-name guys just kind of pop out of nowhere as allies of the Lights who have their own agenda, and I mean no-name literally, as none of the Reach members actually have names. Officially speaking, they are the Ambassador, the Scientist. It's quite frankly baffling as to why the writers decided to do that. Now, there is a mostly satisfying explanation later on in the season, as well as an explanation for the ongoing mystery of the missing 16 hours of the core Leaguers being unaccounted for during their takeover by Vandal Savage at the end of season 1, but my point is that the opening few episodes of Invasion are so jarring for the above reasons that I actually wouldn't be surprised if people gave up right there in the first 10 minutes or so. I basically did. I got halfway through the second episode and had to stop because I was bored and confused, only to pick it back up later because I have a problem. And for what it's worth, season 2 does get better as it goes on. Explanations are given, and while most feel like they were withheld for shock value, they're still more or less satisfying. For example, we don't learn until episode 7 that Aqualad isn't actually a villain, but is instead in a deep cover mission to infiltrate the Lights and help destroy them from within. Blue Beetle, who is more or less the main character for much of season 2, gets an explanation for his scarab pretty late as well. That a scarab is sent to each planet to become a forward agent for the Reach, and through a series of circumstances involving the previous Blue Beetle, the scarab malfunctioned and then became attached to Jaime Reyes, the current Blue Beetle. As well, the reason aliens are suddenly appearing on Earth is because Savage sent the core Leaguers to terrorize different worlds and make other sentient life aware of Earth in the first place, thus making it a target for alien invaders that can be used for the Light. And that's also the answer to the missing 16 hours. They were sent to destroy stuff. You know, these things make some amount of sense in the usual comic booky way, but the meta reason for all of these events being interconnected and occurring so close together is... And look, recentering a series from an ensemble piece to largely a solo character piece focusing on Blue Beetle, as was done here, also isn't an inherently bad move so long as it's done right, and for everything bad or frustrating about Invasion, Jaime Reyes is a solid main protagonist. But I don't think any of these changes was ever going to do anything but leave a bad taste in the mouth. Young Justice's first season was all about the slowly tightening connections between its core characters and their evolving circumstances and relationships with each other, and how those evolutions and relationships affected everyone else. It was a web of interconnectivity. Invasion, while still a good product and largely worthy of the show, is at its core an inherently different kind of product. It's a slower, more plodding story with heavy emphasis on plot rather than character, with many twists and turns in its narrative that serve to complicate things, while also driving more and more focus onto Jaime and his connections to the villains in the Reach. There are 3 storylines that intersect and run parallel to each other at certain points, all involving the Reach and the Light. First is the investigation to discover who they even are and what their connection is to the Light, which is a question that persists even after we think it's been answered. Second is Jaime's connection to the Reach, and more specifically his connection to the other Beetles that we meet, the villainous Black Beetle and the friendly Green Beetle. Third is the deep cover mission involving Aqualad, Nightwing, and later Artemis, who fakes her death and goes undercover alongside the former, where we see a different side of Black Manta and see some of the inner workings and shifting allegiances of the Light, namely their casting out of Sportsmaster and hiring of Deathstroke, which will be important for Season 3. As well, there's a minor plot point about the core Leaguers going off-world to attend a trial for their mind-controlled assault of other planets, which is mostly an excuse to get the powerhouses out of the plot to let the smaller heroes, our main cast, try to pick up the pieces and resolve everything before it's too late. Again, 3 storylines isn't necessarily too much. Season 1, for example, had 3 secrets that the characters were keeping and served to drive a lot of the drama. Artemis's past, Mcgann's true form, and Connor's growing dependence on Luthor's performance-enhancing shields. And as well, I'd say that these storylines are actually better developed overall than the 3 in Season 1. Unfortunately, due to a combination of a lower episode count and a much stronger focus on those plots, the only new character that actually gets properly developed is Jaime Reyes, the Blue Beetle, which is the second biggest writing mistake of the season. There are too many characters for what the show is able or willing to properly juggle. At best, the new faces get a single episode or half episode of establishment. Not establishment as in introducing them or providing an interesting backstory, but establishment as in establishing their core personality without any nuance. The new Robin, Tim Drake, gets half of the first episode. Wonder Girl, Cassie Sandsmark, gets an episode. The second Guardian, Mal Duncan, gets an episode. Batgirl gets 2 lines.
Her ability to control the minds of men is why Alpha is an all-female squad for this mission.
Oh, really? And would you have felt the need to justify an all-male squad for a given mission?
There's no right answer for that, is there? So, Nightwing out.
Granted, there's some good lines, but besides that, she's just Batman or Robin with the exact same skill set and no personality to make up for that. Bumblebee gets a few scattershot scenes where she neglects her boyfriend. Lagoon Boy is literally only there for relationship drama fodder between Superboy and Miss Martian, and he isn't even in Season 3, not even in a cameo. I know next to nothing about these characters, which is a huge problem because a huge plot point towards the end relies on my caring about them, namely that they're all kidnapped by the villains and need to be rescued. Jaime really is the standout here. He's the only direct successor of the group. Nightwing, Superboy, and Miss Martian have all decided to differentiate themselves from their mentors, while Jaime is literally the next Blue Beetle after Ted Kord. And he's also unique in that he's the only one that hasn't really had a mentor in a traditional sense. The reason the Scarab attached to him in the first place was because the original Blue Beetle was attacked by the Light and killed in the ensuing explosion, while Jaime just happened to be passing by. This leads to some interesting effects on Jaime and the Scarab. Though nobody really knew about its true nature, it does provide more of a justification for Jaime knowing next to nothing about the Scarab, and he can't really talk to anyone about it since no one except dead people have any idea what it's about. And as the season goes on, we come to realize that Jaime really values his teammates, his surrogate mentors, and any guidance he can receive in this strange new landscape. As a result, Jaime is mostly a solo act despite being a part of the team. He doesn't have that connection, that established past of being a sidekick. He's a victim of circumstance, and to his credit, he mostly takes it in stride. The only hints we get about his feelings towards being a hero are in his generally kind of irritable attitude. But even then, he does what's right without complaint, and when he learns of the horrible future he helps set into motion, he's the first to tell the others so that they can work together to try and prevent it from ever happening. And it's that previously mentioned value of mentorship that leads to some of his better episodes, namely when he teams up with Superboy, when the roles are reversed and he has to try and mentor a group of young and confused new metas, and it also leads to Jaime's downfall, as it pushes him to too eagerly trusting Green Beetle, which results in his Scarab and thus his body falling under the control of the Reach. In terms of a personal journey, it's Jaime's as he tries to come into his own as a hero that resonates the most soundly. And if nothing else, I'm glad I watched this season to see it unfold, as it was really well done, I felt. And while we're talking about things that I liked in Invasion, I liked the Reach and the Light and how they played off of one another. Each were full of themselves and silently vied for control over the other, and the heroes were able to be smart and recognize that animosity to use it against them, leading into a major victory. The entirety of the Light storyline involving Calder is all around fantastic, and while it is all a ruse, his connection to his father Black Manta feels genuine and caring, like an actual father to his son, and it effectively plays on the audience's want to see Black Manta redeem himself, and for that to come from the love he has for Calder, which ultimately doesn't happen and is rightfully disappointing in the best of ways. The only thing I dislike, or rather don't understand about the whole plotline, is unfortunately the biggest part of it. Why was it necessary for Artemis to go in with him? Sure, it ended up that she was needed, but she was only needed because Sportsmaster wanted revenge on Calder for supposedly killing Artemis, and because Miss Martian wanted revenge on Calder for supposedly killing Artemis. There are a couple other things, but the point is that every major complication that arises during the deep cover mission, that we see anyway, usually involves Artemis's death, at least peripherally. Am I mad about this? Not particularly. Any involvement of Artemis is a good one. Wally gets to flex his emotional chops in worrying about her, and it leads to my single favorite episode of the season, Complications, which is a massive cluster of Sportsmaster and Cheshire versus Artemis and Black Manta versus Miss Martian as they try to defend Calder, who is acting like he's in a psychically induced coma, but really isn't because Miss Martian was kidnapped and fixes him, but he can't reveal that he's fixed because if he does, then Black Manta will kill Miss Martian, and throughout all of this, she's looking for a way to escape, but she can't because she has an inhibitor collar on, so Artemis has to somehow get her inhibitor collar off, protect Calder, protect Black Manta as part of her cover, and discreetly tell both Cheshire and Sportsmaster who she is in such a way that Black Manta doesn't find out, all while trying to cover her tracks and pretend she's an enemy of Miss Martian's. It's absolutely insane, and I loved every goddamn minute of it. Can you tell? I consider that episode to be about on par with some of the first season's best, but unfortunately it's the only one I can say that about. The others are all fairly good, and get better as the season goes on, but Invasion as a whole is of a lower quality per episode. Part of that is due to the more serialized storytelling. With major arc-based shows, the arc itself is generally greater than the sum of its parts. But another, larger part is due to the aforementioned lackluster cast that's too big. For the sake of consistency, let's look at the characters. Batgirl, Bumblebee, Guardian 2, Robin 2, Wonder Girl, Beast Boy, and Blue Beetle I've already gone over. And I know I said that by the end there are 13 members of the team, but that doesn't account for all of the new characters that are important. Just to round out the team itself, first we have the introduction of Impulse, aka Bart Allen, aka Barry Allen's yet-to-be-born grandson from the future. He comes from a time where the Reach won, and Blue Beetle is a massive dick that subjugates the planet under their thumb, and volunteered on a one-way trip to the past to prevent that future from happening, starting with preventing the death of Barry Allen, which he does in his introductory episode. From there, he forms a bond with Jaime and tells him of the future so that they can work together to stop the Reach and keep Jaime on the straight and narrow, and stands out as the second best newcomer with the most to him, not least because he's the only one who gets an actual introductory episode. I don't really have a lot to say about him other than that I liked him fine, as other than his backstory, he doesn't have a lot of depth as a character, though he at least has personality in spades, always quipping and fast-talking and messing with people, like a more hyperactive version of Wally West. I mean, yeah, I found him pretty fun. Moving on. The second member of the team to join is the original Roy Harper, who is freed from his cryogenic tube by Red Arrow after over a 5-year search. He's bitter and resentful toward Green Arrow for giving up the search, thankful to Red Arrow for keeping it up, and vengeful toward Lex Luthor for taking his life and his arm. He leads a one-man assault on Luthor, and eventually cuts a deal with him. Roy will let Luthor live and let bygones be bygones, and in exchange, Luthor won't hunt for Roy, and will gift him a new cybernetic arm. Roy accepts these terms and adopts the name Arsenal, wherein he joins the team. Throughout the season, he constantly endangers missions, and when Blue Beetle is taken over and captures them all, he outright abandons his teammates to their fate, as his greatest fear is being put into another pod for the foreseeable future. Due to these factors, he's kicked off the team once they're rescued. Again, I don't have a lot to say about Roy. He's similar to Bart in that he's a more extreme version of the previous character, in this case turning Red Arrow's no-nonsense all-for-the-mission attitude into being a slightly unhinged rage monster who yells at everyone and is only out for himself. Is it neat to see him and Red Arrow interact? Yeah, but I mean, He feels so wholly disconnected from the whole Reach plot that I kinda have to question his inclusion. Like, he does exactly one important thing, which is helping to save the team when they've been captured. Other than that, all he serves to do is fuel drama within the team, which isn't particularly interesting, especially when it's been done before by his own clone, and that drama was actually meant to serve a purpose within the mole plot of season 1. With the team out of the way, there's also a group of kids that are captured by the Reach and had their metagene activated. In this world, humans are sometimes born with a metagene, which can awaken supernatural abilities within them if the subject is placed under great enough stress. Upon their rescue, the kids are placed inside of a holding facility where they can hone their powers to where they won't accidentally hurt people. But as they feel just as much like prisoners there as with the Reach, they break out and go on the run. After an encounter with Blue Beetle where they have to save his butt, they form a kind of loose partnership with Lex Luthor, who eventually sends them to the location of the captured team, where they and Arsenal manage to free them, even while wholly outmatched by Black Beetle. Though this was all for the purposes of allowing the light to steal from the Reach without them knowing. These characters include Tai Longshadow, Jaime's friend who gains the ability to summon a spectral avatar around himself, Eduardo Dorado Jr., who can teleport, Virgil Hawkins, who has power over static electricity, and yes, he's that static, and Asami Koizumi, who can manipulate her chi to do various things like shoot herself through the air. Together they form an unofficial group, colloquially called the Runaways, and they were based on the Super Friends, which emphasized having different races, genders, and other inclusionary stuff like that, which is fine, whatever. I don't think it makes the group any better or worse. I also don't have a lot to say about really any of them. For as popular as Static Shock once was, the character who comes to be known as Static in the Young Justice canon is the least interesting of the group by far. He's just kind of generically nice and kind of a leader. Asami, nicknamed Sam by the others, is cute and quirky, and her thing of the characters having to guess what she's saying, because she can't speak English, is a fun dynamic, I guess. Tai Longshadow is the most established character, but he just kinda comes off as generically grumpy and sullen. He got the typical bad family life of an asshole stepfather, and while he does have that personal connection with Jaime, the two barely interact, and when they do, it's rarely ever meaningful or important that they actually knew each other beforehand, as it's often in his Blue Beetle armor where Tai doesn't know who he is. Eduardo, who goes by El Dorado, gets the most development, especially in season 3, but for now, he's as forgettable as the others. Now with the boring guys out of the way, we can get to the returning characters. As I said before, Superboy is perhaps the most logical continuation from his character in season 1, whereas we mostly saw him as a brute and a rage monster with some development towards becoming a more well-adjusted individual. We see the results of that transformation in Invasion. While he retains his edge and kind of bad attitude, he's also a lot more professional and willing to participate and help out outside of his involvement with the team. He's almost become the older brother that Calder was in season 1, with particularly Jaime looking up to him if their duel episode is any indication. The only thing I don't like about him is his power level. I'm aware that Connor doesn't physically age due to the unusual circumstances of his creation, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. Unfortunately, Invasion marks the trend of Connor slowly becoming less and less relevant on the power scale. Whereas he was a formidable force in season 1, at least against mid-tier villains like the ones he was facing, he's outclassed and overpowered in basically every fight he gets into starting here in Invasion. So while I may like Connor as a character, I have to question why he's still touted as the strongman of the team. I don't know, I just wish they eventually made him develop the remainder of his Kryptonian powers at some point, or had the team themselves develop shields for him to use in emergencies, but c'est la vie. Miss Martian was a character I didn't care for much in season 1. It was far from a matter of disliking her, and some of her episodes were really good, and her relationship with Connor was in many ways the emotional core of the show at several points. But as I said, she acts completely different in Invasion when compared to her bubbly self in season 1. If I'm recalling correctly, she doesn't ever use her catchphrase of "Hello, Mcgann" a single time past season 1, which may be more indicative than anything I'm about to say. More than that though, her entire personality has deteriorated, and in its place is this serious covert agent who's in charge of entire task forces and doesn't really joke around and is very serious about her job. While this is far from a bad shift and even somewhat expected from the massive 5-year time jump, it doesn't change that it's an incredibly jarring transition. Thankfully, once the palette is cleansed and we can look at this new character with fresh eyes, Invasion Mcgann is really good. While she's definitely not as quotable or even as lovable as the ditzy girl we knew, she's probably more interesting. Mcgann's whole deal is that she's essentially mind-reading. people and has become generally overzealous in her use of her mind-altering powers. While a lot of this can come off as a betrayal to the Mcgann character from before, and I would agree with you in that assessment, taking Invasion's Mcgann on its own reveals a really intriguing examination into the moral implications of being a telepath, and specifically the consequences of becoming too relaxed about who the telepaths use it on and why they're doing what they're doing. To point out the two most obvious examples, the reason that Connor and Mcgann have separated between seasons is that Mcgann attempted to forcibly alter Connor's memory against his wishes, completely disregarding his limits for her own selfish purposes. And this explanation gives us as the audience a very clear and understandable reason why Connor would not only terminate the relationship immediately, but why he feels so uncomfortable talking to her even after however many months had passed since the breakup, despite them still working well together as part of the team. This conflict between them lasts throughout the whole season, even as they clearly have lingering feelings for each other. For what it's worth, Mcgann does regret doing that to Connor, but she still does the exact same thing to their enemies, again, against Connor's advice, which directly comes from her introductory episode, by the way. In that episode, she makes several errors in judgment of when to use her telepathic powers, both on the team and on their adversaries. Eventually, Robin tells her that it's okay to mess their minds up because
it's okay with the bad guys.
Jump to season 2, and what's Mcgann's justification for mind-raping their enemies?
They're not victims. They're the bad guys.
Yeah, that's what's called plain good writing, and that line specifically makes the whole idea of Mcgann having become this way a lot more palatable. The tipping point of her arc comes when Artemis quote-unquote dies at the hands of Calder. Mcgann immediately seeks vengeance, and she takes the first opportunity she has, completely shattering Calder's mind, as well as seeing the things he doesn't want people to know about, namely the deep cover mission and that Artemis is alive. For the next several episodes, she can barely muster the will to use even basic applications of her powers, so thoroughly ashamed at what she's done and how terrible of a person she's allowed herself to become in the years since her arrival to Earth. Mcgann's story is a classic example of the road to hell is paved with good intentions, where she resolved to do whatever it takes to dole out what she considered justice and became more and more zealous with how she doled it out, until the consequences came crashing into her like a truck. Everything up to this point, and including when she's kidnapped by Artemis to restore Calder's mind, is fantastic stuff.
But the breakup was your idea.
Don't pretend you don't know why.
I know. You disapprove of how I use my psychic powers.
You mean how you abuse them? Ripping intel from the minds of your victims with no concern for what it does to their psyches.
They're not victims. They're the bad guys. That information is helping the team, the league, the entire planet.
And leaving your victims in a catatonic state. It's not right, Mcgann. You're behaving no better than Simon.
If you feel that strongly, why not tell Nightwing? Or the league?
I was hoping I mattered enough to you to make you stop. I didn't think you'd try to tamper with my mind. Try to make me forget I was upset with you.
Connor, I'm so sorry about that.
Sorry you did it? Or sorry you got caught? After all we'd been through, how could you think I wouldn't recognize your touch inside my mind? Didn't you know what that touch meant to me? And to have you perverted like that? Guess I was kidding myself.
It made Mcgann a much more interesting character, and her arc allowed the show to ask tougher questions about how far is too far, without having to go ultra dark like Daredevil or the Punisher. In general, one of Young Justice's greatest strengths as a piece of media is the clever workarounds it employs to ask tough or dark questions about the nature of heroes, politics, and trust, among other things. And as a microcosm of that idea, you need look no further than Mcgann's arc in Invasion. At least, up to that point that I mentioned. Possibly due to the lower episode count, or maybe they just didn't have a good way to wrap it up, the end of her whole character arc is incredibly limp, with her just kind of acknowledging that she was wrong and says she won't do it again, which... fine, sure, that's probably how a real-life person would handle things if they were an adult, but this is a TV show about superheroes. One of my biggest problems with Young Justice as a whole can also be microcosmed by Mcgann's arc. For as much as I love Season 1, there's no denying that it feels unfinished. It isn't so much a complete arc of a larger story as it was the first act. Yes, there is a soft climax in the season finale, but nothing was really accomplished other than simply breaking even by thwarting the Light's plan to take over the Justice League. The show often feels like it's spinning its wheels, with many episodes only having tenuous links at best to the larger plot, which, if they wanted to be a plot-centric show like an Invasion, is a huge problem. In Invasion, we have to spend an entire episode having a random gladiator alien guy wrecking face. What was the point of that? As well, and this is a largely personal preference, there was no truly heroic moment in this show, in any of its 3 seasons. What do I mean by that? Well, remember the World of Cardboard speech in Justice League? I wanted something like that. I don't care who has it or what the circumstance is, but I want something like that where the hero completely owns the villain to cap off an arc. The closest we have that I can recall is in Bereft in Season 1 with Mcgann's whole get out of my head thing, but that was pretty weak when compared to some of the other offerings from the superhero genre. And what kills me is I immediately thought of one as I was watching Invasion for the first time, and foolishly thought I was going to get it. At the very end of the episode Complications, it's revealed through Nightwing watching a news broadcast that Jaime, or more specifically his Scarab, has become a Reach agent, and that he was the one that captured the team. Nightwing snaps the Batarang he was inspecting, and gives this great glare, right?
Thank you. Thank you all. But it is I who should express gratitude to you, Ambassador, for giving a normal, average human being like me the power of the Reach. The power to save the world.
Well, I wanted Nightwing to kick his ass. The most consistent part of Nightwing's character was how he realized that he didn't ever want to become the Batman once Bruce steps down. That the thought of being willing to sacrifice his friends so callously as he did in Failsafe horrified him.
Hurting. Try traumatized. I finally become leader and wind up sending all of my friends to their deaths. I know I did what I had to, but I hated it. And that's not even the worst of it. You can't tell Batman.
Nothing leaves this room.
I always wanted, expected, to grow up and become him. And the hero bit, I'm still all in. But that thing inside of him, the thing that drives him to sacrifice everything for the sake of his mission, that's not me. I don't want to be the Batman anymore.
Come Invasion, we see Nightwing acting very dubiously. He keeps Calder's deep cover mission a secret from as many people as possible, including Zatanna, who made the glamour charm necessary to disguise Artemis, Superboy, and Mcgann, to obviously disastrous results. He's already crossed several lines on the moral scale just with that, so what if it was revealed that he secretly developed countermeasures to every member of the team, just like Batman did to the Justice League in the Tower of Babel storyline? Not only would it have semi-adapted a famous storyline like Young Justice does anyway, it would also neatly show us how far Nightwing has fallen, and would have given him and the team a great reason to separate from each other at the end of the season like they already do. But instead of a boring "I'm sick of this gig" like he gives Calder in the final episode, we would have had this really powerful moment. Instead, Dick would have realized how shitty he'd become in the intervening 5 years while fighting the light, and left to better himself, which is a storyline that would continue neatly in Outsiders as he finds that redemption by training a new group of metas and putting them on the right path. If this occurred, we might even see him on the opposite side of the whole anti-light issue in that season, I don't know. And as part of this plan, Nightwing would have tech and the knowledge to utterly dominate Blue Beetle, especially when he's controlled by a third party. For all of his faults, Nightwing does care about the team and every member within it. So while logically it's clear that Jaime is being used by the Reach, when put into that kind of emotional stress, it would have been completely understandable if Dick lost his cool and went on a warpath toward Jaime to learn where his teammates are being held. But no. Instead, they lay a boring ambush for Blue Beetle, and nothing really interesting comes from it except Zatanna gets to do the magic thing finally. Like, she was essentially made a vegetable in her other appearance in Invasion, so I was happy to get something from her. Nightwing in general is very underwhelming in Invasion. Despite being very prominent throughout the entire season, he gets next to nothing to do other than going over mission briefings for like 75% of the entire thing, which is a huge letdown. Jesse McCartney still knocks it out of the park with what is there, but I found that his attitude change was the most interesting thing about him, which I've already mentioned doesn't really go anywhere. He just kind of turns off the serious mode when the Reach are defeated. Cool. Calder is interesting in that we get to see him interact more with his father, and through their relationship, as is common for the show, we see different sides of Black Manta as a character. But Calder himself doesn't go through an arc or ever really struggle with being loyal to his father or to his mission. He's just a straight double agent within the light, and at the end he beats up his dad. Again, a bit disappointing. And while I could talk about both Artemis and Wally, neither of them really get that much to do. Artemis, despite being on the deep cover mission, doesn't do hardly anything until Complications, where she's great, and from there it's back to the usual until the mission is over. Wally, meanwhile, is kind of in a weird male war bride situation, where his girlfriend is on this super dangerous mission and he's left at home worrying about her. There's a great scene in Darkest where Wally gets super pissed off at the lengths Nightwing and Aqualad are taking to maintain the deep cover and give each other information, as Calder literally blew up Mount Justice to prove his loyalty. And during the conversation, he expresses a theory that Calder is actually acting as a triple agent and playing Nightwing for a fool.
Do you even hear yourself? What if even one of you had been left behind, huh? Why take that risk? Why go to such extremes?
The drive explains that too. He needed to cement his position with the light and the light's partner.
Wasn't that why he murdered Artemis?
I guess it didn't convince everyone.
You guess?
The cave was just a place worth sacrificing if it helps us stop the invasion. Look, I'm sorry you lost all your souvenirs.
Are you serious? I don't care about that junk. I'm worried about Artemis, terrified for her. You put her right into his hands.
Wally, we're talking about Calder here.
I know. Calder, our friend, who, in the space of a few months, lost the love of his life and found out Black Manta was his father. Isn't it possible Aqualad might actually be a traitor? A triple agent?
While the suspicions don't really go anywhere, the Wally anger is greatly appreciated and gives the whole situation a lot of narrative weight as things keep escalating more and more. And then, of course, we have Invasion's ending. So the season starts off pretty bad, right? And it gets progressively better as it goes until the last episode, which is by far the worst episode of any of the show's seasons, and by a very wide margin. After the team has outed the Reach as the invaders they are, after having infiltrated and fractured the alliance between the Reach and the Light, and after Black Beetle, the Ambassador, and the Scientist have all been dealt with, it's revealed that the Reach had a failsafe to blow up the planet should they fail. Because of course they did. The heroes rally together and manage to stop every single one of them no problem. Great. Oh, but wait, they detect a final device and oh shucks, it's too late. So Flash, Impulse, and then Kid Flash all run around it to try and contain the damage. But because Wally is slower than the others, the excess energy is being coursed through him as a conduit, eventually leading to him vanishing into thin air, seemingly dying. Wally hasn't been in nearly any of the actual plot in Invasion. He is not a part of the team, nor is he really even a superhero anymore. But for the sake of shock value and a desperate bid for views, the studio decided to kill off this major character. Fantastic. Wonderful. I'm so glad. And that, my friends, is the final biggest writing mistake this season makes. If they really wanted to kill off Wally West, I really have no problem with that. But this, the way it happened, was just so unearned, unsatisfying, and was done solely for shock value, and I cannot defend it in any capacity. If we can somehow get over the how of why it happened, the direction it leads several of the characters and outsiders is interesting enough, but I refuse to give that credit to Invasion, not only because of the time gap between seasons, but due to it literally being the last episode. Almost ever if streaming hadn't picked up. That's the closest thing I can come to praise for Wally's death. Overall, Young Justice Invasion is still a decent season of TV, with an interesting, if perhaps misguided, shift to a narrative focus rather than a character focus. For what it's worth, and very much despite some logical inconsistencies, the narrative itself is good and interesting. However, due to just how jarring the transition is from Season 1 to Invasion, I would actually recommend watching Invasion first, and then view Season 1 as a kind of prequel a la Crisis Core. That way, when jumping from Season 1 to Outsiders, the tone shift won't be quite as bad, and those two seasons feel much more like part of the same show as opposed to Invasion. It's just really unfortunate that they dropped the ball with the ending. What could have been. So many of you may not know this, but I am a writer. Now, obviously I'm writing this analytical video, but critiques were not my first choice in the writing sphere, and it's not where my passion lies. Instead, I like to make stories. I'm currently working on 3 projects. One, a short little ditty about 2 strangers helping each other with their problems over the course of a day. This one is done with the first draft, and I'm working up the time and motivation to draft a second and create a cover for it. The next is a more young adults-oriented piece about a post-apocalyptic world where a group of survivors have holed up in a city they call Paradise and split into 3 packs, where they're granted enhanced strength and extra abilities by their gods to protect themselves from the mindless creatures they call wild things, and from each other as tensions escalate into war. The third is a hardcore fantasy series with a planned 20, count 'em, 20 planned installments that I won't go into for fear of boring you. I've dabbled in plenty of genres, but if you want some of my more recent work, which is all fan works I make in between my original projects, I wrote Sunshine, a short little Supergirl story about depression and the power of love, The Cruel Spider and United We Stand, big readaptations of the first 2 Percy Jackson series with an anime-esque style and more refined character arcs, and I'm in the process of writing Property of a Woman, which is an expanded adaptation of Fire Emblem 3 Houses. The point I make about telling you all of this is 1, exposure, and 2, to relay that I write a lot. I have been writing since the 7th grade, so I know my way around a word processor and like to think I know what makes a good story for my tastes, which is what I always write to appeal to. That said, for fun, I've come up with a story about Young Justice to more cleanly transition between seasons 1 and 2. Now, this is far from a fully formed idea, but I thought I'd give a rough outline. So this season 1.5 would be subtitled Expansion, and would deal with the expanding forces of both the team and the Light as they build a dedicated army to carry out their plans, and it would take place 3 years after the first season's ending. With the Light, the opposing forces will be the League of Shadows, led by Light member Ra's al Ghul, and Black Manta's forces. On the team's end, the season would start with them struggling to match the expectations placed on them after their massive victory at the end of season 1. In the opening, both Zatanna and Rocket graduate to the League, and Roy is obviously looking for the original Speedy at the time, leaving the original 6 to work out their problems. Then, after a chance get-together proves that expanding their roster isn't such a bad idea, they dedicate more time to that. The catalyst for this change would be Tula, or Aquagirl, Calder's old squeeze. On a whim, she would visit Calder and would end up going on a mission with them, proving to be an invaluable asset with her Atlantean magic. From there, the team would be split in 2. Robin, Superboy, and Miss Martian would scout for potential candidates, while Aqualad, Aquagirl, Kid Flash, and Artemis would pursue the Light and discover the power struggle between Black Manta and Ra's, using a lead given by Garth, perhaps as recompense for him not joining the team when Tula did. The recruitment squad search starts off well, with Wonder Woman introducing her protege, a young Cassie Sandsmark, at this point being 12 years old, who was allowed to leave Themyscira as a kind of team intern due to a combination of her young age and her surprisingly exceptional skill. She would form a bond with Connor over their mutual strength, though he would take a while to get used to the fact that he isn't the only powerhouse the team had anymore, and he also might be jealous of her being able to fly. From there, their search quickly dries up, with other proteges either unwilling or not allowed to join the team for this, that, or the other reason. As Robin starts to become obsessed with the search, fearing for his friends' lives with them being so understaffed, it puts a strain over his now long-distance relationship with Zatanna, which isn't helped when it's Barbara Gordon, who has become Batgirl in the time skip, that helps him emotionally. Zatanna would force Dick to take time away from the mission, which Connor and Mcgann agree with, leading him back to Gotham for a while. Here, he would become a bit introspective and continue his arc from season 1, questioning what he wants to be as he grows older, and more responsibility is placed on him and the team as they achieve more and more parity with the League, a throughline which would culminate in his decision to carve an identity for himself away from the Batman mantle and become Nightwing by the end of the season. During his time in Gotham, he would reconnect with Barbara and invite her to join the team, which she accepts. Meanwhile, the two come across a young orphaned boy named Jason Todd, whom Dick takes in after recognizing their similarities, as well as Jason's surprising talent in combat and acrobatics. Deciding to take Jason under his wing, the trio return to the team 2 people stronger than when Dick left. Unfortunately, Jason is irritable and uncooperative, questioning why they have to operate in the shadows when they're helping people, and why they have to wait for the League's permission to do any good. Questions which Dick struggles to answer as he's always taken them for granted. Their final new addition comes when Mcgann either is informed of or senses turmoil within Garfield Logan. When they arrive where he is, they find that tragedy has struck. His mother was killed in a freak accident, and he suddenly developed green skin and the ability to transform into animals. Horrified by the events, Garfield turns to Mcgann for comfort. She and Connor clash on what to do to help him, with Connor saying that he should still think about his mother and remember her fondly, whereas Mcgann believes he should be embracing his new gifts and see them as such instead of a curse. Things escalate with Garfield not getting any better on either account, and in a last desperate bid to help him with his skin condition and trauma, Mcgann tries to alter Connor's memories to make him think that Garfield was always like this and that Garfield was normal, which backfires as we know it did in Invasion. Connor breaks up with her immediately, and Garfield is left in the center of what is essentially a divorce, and he finds strength in consoling both parties. The responsibility of caring for people he loves is how he ultimately comes to grips with his mother's death, as he sees himself in carrying on her legacy of selflessly caring for him. On the other side of things, the mid-season finale would detail the fatal mission where Aquagirl dies. This fatality would devastate the team and the rest of the superhero and Atlantean communities. Following it, Calder would doubt his leadership and training, especially when he learns that Black Manta is his father, and that he wants Calder to join him and gain favor with the Light in the face of both Raz's great influence, along with a new partner, which would lead to the team's fight against the Reach in Invasion. Meanwhile, Artemis and Wally would question whether they wanted to continue risking their lives like they are. You could even have it be where Tula sacrifices herself to save one or the other, forcing the party that wasn't saved to grapple with the idea that they could easily lose the other, which would eventually lead into their retirement. All things come to a head when the team learns of a planned attack by the League of Shadows against Black Manta's forces, which they elect to stop, though only because Jason elects to stop it himself, and the team is forced to pursue him before he gets himself killed, a la Death in the Family. Calder steps down as leader due to his recent trauma, and Dick assumes the mantle by donning the Nightwing suit. Seeing how close he and Barbara have become and recognizing the fundamentally different places their lives are taking them, Zatanna breaks up with him. Despite their differences and broken trust, with a little urging from Garfield, Mcgann and Connor resolve to continue saving lives together. Both Artemis and Wally inform the others that, assuming the mission goes well, that it would be their last before they retire to go off to college together. Meanwhile, the new members of the team resolve to prove themselves as legitimate members. Jason confronts Raz, who toys with him and berates him as an idiot for charging headfirst into danger without a plan, calling him a pitiful excuse for a Robin, and is about to strike him down when Nightwing interrupts. Dick counters that Jason has already learned the most important lesson in being a hero, and that's mustering the strength of character to do what is right even when everyone else stands against you. That it's the one thing you need to be a Robin, Batgirl, Wonder Girl, Beast Boy, Superboy, Artemis, Kid Flash, Miss Martian, Aqualad, Aquagirl, or a Nightwing. The expanded team does battle with the League of Shadows strike force, and though Nightwing and Jason alone are no match for Ra's al Ghul's millennia of training, together the team defeats him, just in time for Black Manta to arrive on the scene. Raz's defeat would spell the end of their vying to be the Light's army, and pave the way for Black Manta to take that spot. In the aftermath, Calder betrays the team, citing the heroic ideal as what got Tula killed, and defects to join his father. Unbeknownst to everyone but Dick and Calder, the latter is actually going into deep cover to learn more about the Light's partner and hopefully dismantle the organization, which would finally lead us cleanly into Invasion proper, with all of the pieces more or less lined up. Again, it's just a rough outline, and I doubt I'll ever actually take the time to write it, but it was fun to think up, and hopefully it sparked a few things in your minds.
We were on the verge of greatness. We were this close.
Released in 2019 and now available on HBO Max, Young Justice's much anticipated third season, dubbed Outsiders, was released to much fanfare, I think. Honestly, I have no idea what the general fanbase thinks of any of the seasons, except everyone unanimously agreeing that the first season was the best. But for me, I was really excited for Outsiders, just because I was ready to get back into the swing of things after the misstep of Invasion's ending. And for the most part, it didn't disappoint me. Once again, we have a time jump between seasons, but this one is a much more reasonable 2 years, and with logical differences between the two in terms of character relation and growth. The Justice League is now losing the war. Led by Calder, who has become the next Aquaman, along with Wonder Woman, who is in space, they're bogged down by the bureaucracy of the United Nations, which is helmed by Lex Luthor. While the team still operates covertly, the League itself is mostly there for show at this point, unable to stop the growing surge of metahuman trafficking, which is the main issue for this season. At this, Batman, his proteges minus Nightwing and Barbara Gordon, along with several other Leaguers, officially resigned to once again work as freelance vigilantes, unbeholden to the League's strict rules. Meanwhile, after an incident where Black Lightning, aka Jefferson Pierce, believes he murdered a mind-controlled metahuman child, his powers over electricity are now on the fritz, and he resigns as well, separate from Batman. Suddenly, he's contacted by Dick Grayson, who is operating solo, with the help of a crippled Barbara Gordon, to stop metahuman trafficking rings by himself. To take out his latest target, he recruits Artemis, who has once again given up the hero life to try try and work out her emotional problems in dealing with Wally's death, Superboy, who has settled down with Mcgann in Happy Harbor and actually proposes to her near the start of the season, and Black Lightning, who he wants for his honesty and sharp mind rather than his powers, into infiltrating a high-class party in Markovia in the hopes of exposing a trafficking operation. Days earlier, the king and queen of Markovia were assassinated by a metahuman, which has caused a strict ban on them in the country, though both of the young princes aim to stop that once the elder brother comes to power. The younger brother, Breon Markov, is also trying to activate his own metagene with the hopes of using what power he gains to find his missing sister, Tara Markov, who was kidnapped 5 years prior. In the end, all parties collide, and through the mission, the covert mission gets hot. Breon's metagene is activated by a Dr. Helga Jace, who wishes to help him find Tara, and both of them, along with a strange girl who can come back from the dead, are essentially adopted by every member of the team except Nightwing, who absolved himself of any responsibility for a while. Breon, who has an anger problem, is sent to Connor and Mcgann in the hopes that they can help calm him down. The strange girl, who eventually goes by Violet, is sent to the Harper house with Artemis, where she lives with the Roy Harper clone formerly known as Red Arrow, now going by Will Harper, and her niece Leanne, whom she helps care for. Finally, Helga Jace is cared for by Jefferson, and the two eventually start dating. Eventually, they add a fourth stray to their ranks, an alien bug named Forager, who eventually adopts the Earth name of Fred Bug with 2 Gs, where he, Breon, and Violet form a pretty tight-knit trio. Their connection and their development is the through line connecting the disparate first and second halves of the season. See, Outsiders was released not as a single season of TV, but rather as 2 mini-seasons comprising of 13 episodes each. The first half largely focused on Nightwing as he trains Breon, who goes by Geoforce, Violet, who goes by Halo, and Forager to become heroes in their own right, and who may eventually graduate to become members of the team properly, culminating in a massive rescue operation where they locate and free Tara Markov from her mind control, which is the big finale to the first arc. The second half shifts the focus to the larger world and continues the storylines that were set up in the first half. Namely, the big villain becomes Granny Goodness, Darkseid's helper. Darkseid and Apocalypse were established as working with Vandal Savage and the Light at the end of Invasion, and this season sees them actively working to enslave meta-compatible humans for use in their subjugation of the galaxy, with the main Leaguers off-world trying to combat this. Meanwhile, both Violet's storyline as well as a newly introduced Victor Stone, aka Cyborg, are pulled into the forefront, as Violet is actually the soul of a mother box in the body of a dead girl, and Victor's cybernetics come from a father box assimilating with him after a freak accident, leading the two to have a strange spiritual connection with each other, where Violet can curb the father box's murderous tendencies. Both can open boom tubes using their innate boxes, and it's eventually revealed that Violet's connection to the mother box is the missing piece to the anti-life equation that Darkseid has spent countless eons searching for. The anti-life equation is essentially life without free will, where every sentient entity affected by it is subject to the equation's whims, in this case a mind-controlled Violet. In the end, most of the League is brought under its control, most of the team is as well, and it's up to Victor to free Violet and defeat Granny Goodness. That battle, which is the climax of the season's main conflict, ends in episode 24 of 26. So to get it out of the way now, the biggest issue that Outsiders faces is its pacing. The creators claimed that it was meant to be seen as 2 distinct arcs, but that's not really the case. It's just another season of Young Justice, but with a definitive mid-season finale like you'd see in other shows around Christmas time, where you have a big plot reveal or a turning point for the narrative, or both to make the audience want to tune in after the holiday break. The turning point in Outsiders is threefold. First, the search for Tara ends. Second, it's revealed that the Good Goggles, a VR headset designed by Granny's Earth alias Gretchen Good, is sending subliminal messages to teens with the metagene and directing them to trafficking sites. Third, it's revealed that a newly rescued Tara is still working undercover with the Light, and specifically Deathstroke, promising a Judas Contract-inspired storyline for her. From there, the first 11 of the second arc's 13 episodes are dealing primarily with Granny Goodness, Violet, and Victor. That leaves episode 25 largely being a character study and healing process episode for Artemis, as she finally comes to terms with Wally's death, and episode 26 is a hastily put together conclusion to the Breon-Tara storyline, where the team goes to Markovia after Breon's uncle takes control of the government. Tara is told to murder Beast Boy, as he's the only one stopping Breon from murdering his uncle. In the end, she pulls a heel face turn and joins Team Good Guy, dies, while Breon still goes through with murdering his uncle, usurps control from his older brother, and is excommunicated from the superhero community for being a murderous psychopath. In addition to those main plots, there are side stories. Namely, it's revealed partway through the season that Nightwing wasn't working solo at the start and never was. Instead, he, Batman and his proteges, Mcgann and the team, and Calder and the Justice League were all working behind the scenes to orchestrate everything without anybody else knowing as a direct countermeasure against the light, dubbed the anti-light. And really only those people I named earlier, along with Wonder Woman, Barbara Gordon, and a scant few others, were even aware of this anti-light's existence. Mcgann didn't even tell Connor. That's how secretive they were being about it all. And when Jefferson finds out about this late into the season, he explodes on everyone. He was told by Nightwing at the start that the mission would be a one-time deal, and now it feels eerily like he and everyone else, including the rest of the team, the newcomers, and Beast Boy's team of outsiders, were strung along by this cabal of superheroes against their will, just like how the Light handled things, which Jefferson and everyone else deemed unacceptable. In the end, realizing the error of their ways, Mcgann, Calder, and Wonder Woman step down from their leadership roles, and Jefferson is elected as the leader of the Justice League and its subsidiaries in the team and the Outsiders as one unified force for good, operating openly amongst each other. The second B-plot deals with Beast Boy. He's randomly given episode 12, yes, one episode before the mid-season finale, to randomly discover the Good Goggles conspiracy where he's almost taken control of, and it's only through his overcoming his guilt at his mother's death that he's able to break out of its control. Between seasons, Garfield not only got a better actor to voice him, but he also became the star of a cheesy Star Trek-esque show, which is insanely popular and also happens to be helmed by one Gretchen Good. Though he knows that Good is kidnapping metateens, he's unable to fight against her legally because he's under contract and actually cares about following the law. So instead, he elects to shift the focus of the cultural war back into the hero's favor by showing the many metateens around the world that are suffering that there are kids just like them who are fighting for them. To that end, he forms his own super team called the Outsiders, which, through the power of social media and good PR, quickly wins back favor to the side of the good guys. Of course, much of the Outsiders' success is orchestrated by the Anti-Light, which upsets all of them when they find out, but still. And, stop me if this becomes a bit too much. I really don't know how they did it, but it feels like the showrunners simultaneously tried to do too much and also too little. Too much because, my god, that was a lot that happened in the season, and too little because the main conflict ended 2 episodes early and left us with a horribly rushed finale to a separate conflict. In general, I found Outsiders to be the least bingeable of the 3, even despite Invasion's problems. I think a lot of this is due to how bloated this world has become. We have 5 superhero teams running around this season: the Justice League, the Team, the Outsiders, Nightwing's training team, and Batman's group of proteges. We have 5 main conflicts: the Breon and Markovia situation, Victor and Violet with their respective boxes, Granny Goodness and the Good Goggles, Tara with her Judas contract stuff, and Garfield with the Outsiders. In Season 1, everything was so simple. You had the 6 main characters, a handful of side characters and extra team members, and then you have the villains. They run covert missions. It was very easy to follow, and it allowed us time to really get to know each and every member of the team. In Outsiders, there simply isn't enough time. Care is taken to inject character and personality into every new character, and even the Season 2 cast gets expanded upon with the formation of the Outsiders. But none of them are really comparable in terms of depth or how well we know them as the Season 1 cast. And that's not the Season 1 cast in Season 3 with all of this extra time. I mean the Season 1 cast in Season 1, which is shorter than Outsiders. I think it's really telling that my favorite scenes in the entire season focused on those original 6 cast members. Nightwing suffers from a fever dream in the middle of combat with the rest of the original 6 that are alive, where he imagines that Wally is alive and they're back to being their original ages again. This scene is incredibly self-indulgent, but it presents such a stark focus on the original members of the team that I openly welcomed it, because it finally properly centered around them again as they all struggle to deal with the loss of one of their own in Wally. Similarly, episode 25 was my favorite of the entire season, not only for its fantastic execution, but because, once again, it properly centers around the issue that Invasion's finale promised us: the fallout of Wally West's death. That's what this season should have focused on before all else. Instead, we get a scene and an episode. The rest is fleeting at best and non-existent at worst in favor of expanding a world that's already too big for its budget and timescale. And it's not the new characters' fault either. They're good for what it's worth, and I love how they fleshed out Beast Boy and the rest of the Invasion crew as well. But the fact remains that people initially fell in love with Young Justice because of its original 6 main characters, and they haven't really felt like main characters for 8 years at the time of this writing. I fell in love with the show for the very same reasons, and I've tried so hard to transfer that love to the rest of the show, its cast, and its plot, but I can't. I'm a character guy, and the best characters in Young Justice remain the original 6. But that said, it's not all bad, and in fact, the majority of Outsiders is very good if you can separate it from the rest of the show, and the expectations that come with it. The best part of the season is undoubtedly the Outsiders themselves. As awkwardly placed as that initial Beast Boy episode is in the timeline of the episodes, it injects Garfield with way more character and personality than he got in the entirety of Invasion. I absolutely love that a very outgoing guy like Garfield is a movie star, and is taking advantage of his green skin to become insanely recognizable in that way. I love that Perdita is dating him, and that it's not like a superficial thing, like they actually care about each other and want to help the other. And for those that don't remember, Perdita is the Vladova queen that Wally runs across the country to deliver the heart to in Cold Hearted in season 1. Now, she's 17 and a legitimately good character, if a bit simple for obvious reasons that the show doesn't focus on her. I also love how as soon as Garfield realizes that something is up with the good goggles, and as soon as he realizes the influence he has on social media and the younger generation, he immediately takes a stand, refuses to hide in the shadows like the team does, and pretty much single-handedly strong-arms the entire superhero community into getting on board with his ridiculous plan that actually works because he has the utmost faith in it himself. The entirety of the Season 2 crew is given some much needed attention, and while none of them are nearly as interesting as the original 6 even still, Outsiders managed to make me actually care about them and their struggles as entirely separate entities other than just as members of the team. Like, yes, I cared about their well-being in Invasion, but only in the context of their usefulness to the team's operations, rather than as people. Here, when like half of them are barred from participating in the Outsiders missions because their guardians say no, I felt just as frustrated as them, which was the point of that scene. I felt happy that they were winning the approval of the masses, and the ending scene where their exploits convinced this meta-girl to remove her inhibitor collar willingly just touched my heart. I think the biggest glow-up was Eduardo, who is a member of the Runaways in Season 2. He's a prominent volunteer at the Meta-Teen Relief Center where rescued trafficked meta-teens are taught to control their powers and eventually integrate back into society at their own pace. Eduardo, who went through exactly what these other kids are going through back in Invasion, is able to relate to them in a way that the adults can't, but he feels he isn't doing anything to truly inspire them. He recognizes that many of them view their new powers as curses or obstacles, instead of gifts that can be used to help people. So he decides to join the Outsiders to give them someone to look up to who is just a regular guy like they were. In terms of the other new characters, Breon, Violet, and Forager, they're okay. I think Breon is the most interesting, especially where he ends up, but I honestly don't like Forager that much. He's cute, I guess, but he has no depth other than fitting with the subtitle of the season in that he's literally an outsider to Earth. Violet has much more to her, but almost none of the things she faces are in her control. Either people are lying to her, dragging her this way or that, or she's dealing with what she is, rather than focusing on what her arc ostensibly focuses on, which is who she is. All we get on that front is that she's generally nice and inquisitive and excitable, which is small potatoes compared to even the Outsiders, let alone the original cast. And while I'm on the box girl, we can talk about Victor Stone, who suffers from the same issue as her, but worse. I don't know why Teen Titans is the only animated property that has a really interesting and good cyborg, but it remains the case. Victor starts off good, if standard for the character, angry and feeling neglected by his father. When he becomes cyborg from that freak accident, he's periodically possessed by the corrupted father box, which turns him into a rage monster that wants to kill Violet at all costs. This is terrible. This isn't Victor's anger or violent tendencies. If their intention was the father box feeding off of his existing negative emotions, and that's why it was able to take control of him, then that wasn't explained, even if it would have made perfect sense. Instead, he's just possessed by an outside force with next to no agency in anything that happens to him. Then, when the father box's negative influence is finally expunged from his system, his personality pulls a complete 180 out of nowhere, despite him having that bad attitude even before he had the accident that attached him to the father box. Victor Stone is honestly one of the very few characters in Young Justice that I actively dislike. At least with Violet, she's inquisitive and positive, so she rarely becomes annoying, and her plotlines come from an intriguing place. Whereas Victor, in the context of Young Justice, feels like a soft repeat of her within the same season, which really makes him stand out as being a bad character. If they showed a more gradual change with him, I could see something working there, but he angrily rebuffs the other characters' attempts to console him every chance he gets, right up until that 180 shift. Lastly, we have Breon Markov. I find him much more interesting conceptually than he is fun to watch. He feels like a soft repeat of Superboy from season 1, in that he's an angry and powerful youth who doesn't know how to properly channel his anger, especially towards the beginning of the season. He falls in love with a quirky girl with strange powers that include flight, and his arc sees him dealing with the consequences of his birth. However, instead of being angry with absolutely no direction like Connor, Breon knows exactly what he wants to do and exactly who he wants to punch, but because of bureaucracy and laws, he's unable to, which infinitely frustrates him. However, a lot of the conversations he has about said anger and helplessness are very similar to each other, especially in the first half where Nightwing's only response to Breon's very legitimate frustrations is to be patient, which understandably does little to alleviate this feeling. Unfortunately, the result of this is that Breon's character stagnates very quickly. True, some people just tend towards certain personality traits, and it's a shame that some people are unable or unwilling to put in the effort to overcome their character deficiencies, but I feel like there are better ways to portray that if that was their intention with Breon. Presented how it is, Breon just comes across as a kind of generically angry pretty boy, which is a real shame because he has a great setup for a character arc. And for what it's worth, despite all of that I just said, I'm incredibly interested in the direction they'll take him going forward. Because just as he started from a very interesting place, he ends in one too. So that's one of many reasons for me to look forward to season 4. And that's all of the new characters and outsiders, at least the major ones. I mean, I could always go more in-depth on the returning characters like Nightwing, who is much improved from season 2, or Will Harper, or the bad conclusion to Jade's storyline, but really, I think I've gotten my point across. We have some good characters, some bad ones, some improvements, and some not, but overall, the characters are much improved in Outsiders compared to Invasion, which was a welcome surprise, considering, wait, I feel like I'm forgetting someone. Oh, right. So, Tara Markov is in this season, and she has a Judas contract thing going on. Unfortunately, I've never cared for the Tara character in any incarnation I've seen of her. Even in the Teen Titans show, which is widely regarded as the best adaptation of the Judas contract storyline, neutered though it may be, I only cared about Tara in so much as her betrayal would affect the Titans. Her personal journey was very much a take it or leave it thing for me. In the Judas contract movie, well, I already made a video on that, so I won't repeat myself. Here, Tara Markov isn't even a character. Similarly to Victor or even Breon, almost none of what happens to her really has anything to do with her. She could be literally anyone and things would not change. She doesn't have an interesting connection to any member of any superhero team that would make her betrayal have an emotional punch, and her feeding information to the villains doesn't have a palpable enough effect to really register at all. Like, yes, her feeding Deathstroke information must have some effect on the events that unfold, but for the life of me, I can't remember any specific instance of the heroes losing due to information Deathstroke gained from Tara. More than her lack of plot relevance, however, is that she's just barely a character at all. I think I can count the number of voice lines she has before the final episode on 2 hands, maybe 3. For a main character and the linchpin of your emotional season climax, that's pathetic. And it's not like they're particularly good lines that tell us a lot about her as a person. She's just quiet and aloof, I guess. She hardly interacts with anyone ever. I think the most emotion I got from her before the finale was her being tired when she has to go to school, which, I mean, that says more by itself than I can possibly say in so many words. Unfortunately, Outsiders gave me 2 characters that I actively dislike in Victor and now Tara. The latter is just too inconsequential for me to care about her at all. I have one final complaint with Outsiders, and it's short and self-explanatory. It relies far too much on the big wrap-up scenes. You know, where you have the characters standing in a circle and explaining things that happen behind the scenes to make all of the pieces line up for the finales to happen. In Outsiders, this is all that happens whenever we see the Anti-Light meet up. It's always the characters explaining what they already did to each other for no reason, and then Wonder Woman questions the morality of what they're doing, and then the scene ends. This is terrible. They should have shown us this happening in real time rather than explaining it after the fact, hands down. But really, that's a minor quibble, so I won't hold it against the season too much. As two final points on Outsiders, I want to go positive. First, I'm going to be vague. Outsiders features the first villain of the series that genuinely got under my skin and felt like a terrifyingly true psychopath. I won't spoil it for you because I like the reveal that much, but I will say that it's slightly bogged down by being another one of those wrap-up scenes that I was just bitching about. The reveal itself is excellent though. And finally, I just want to appreciate how dedicated to the concept this season was with the whole outsider idea. Invasion did this to an extent as well, but almost everything about Outsiders in some way, shape, or form deals with outsiders. The Light partners with outsiders in the form of Darkseid and Granny Goodness. Lex Luthor turns the Justice League into outsiders of the international community. The four people that form Nightwing's team are outsiders in some way. Victor views himself as an outsider to society due to his new cybernetics. The members of the Outsiders obviously fit the criteria. Garfield has green skin, Jaime is possessed by an alien bug, Cassie is half god, etc. The only one who is ostensibly normal is Eduardo, and that's his entire point. The entire metahuman trafficking plot is about people who are pulled outside of their society against their will, becoming outsiders due to their new powers, and some were even taken to space, where that applies even more. The level of dedication to a concept is admirable, and I think it's one of the few instances where all of these different additions don't ultimately detract from the product. With a lot of these concept-based products like Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, the concept really drags down the quality of the product in question, in my opinion. But I don't think Outsiders falls into that trap. It had stories it wanted to tell, and it told them, and it feels like the Outsiders label kind of happens to fit after the fact, which is ideal, instead of forcing stories to fit the subtitle artificially. Overall, despite my problems with Outsiders, it's still a good season of TV, and once again, an overall worthy entry into the Young Justice canon. Conclusion and the future. Young Justice is a show that's admittedly hard to recommend to those not already predisposed to like it. While I maintain that the first season is a very good season of TV, especially if you want something good for your kids and young teenagers to enjoy that's not too gratuitous, one of the show's routine problems is not living up to its promises. The first season ended on a really good note, with good segues into potential storylines that were all subsequently dropped come Invasion. And likewise, Invasion promises that the characters will be dealing with the death of Wally West, and hardly any of Outsiders actually deals with that concept, which, while those seasons are still good, as I said, makes for a very frustrating watching experience at times. But if you're able to roll with the punches and appreciate what each season is trying to do individually, I think you'll enjoy this show about as much as I did. But if you're looking for a more traditional series with a consistent main cast that get multiple storylines to their names, you'll be incredibly annoyed going from season to season. Young Justice is a show that thrives on the strength of its characters. They start off quite simple and take time to develop past the teen stereotypes they begin as. But the process of watching that is incredibly satisfying. When the show is focusing on its characters, any characters, not just the season 1 casts, it's at least good. It falters only when it focuses on the Light conspiracy itself, which is an admittedly generic intrigue plotline that holds next to no water for most of the show. As of writing this script, Season 4, subtitled Phantoms, is in production and set for release in 2021, with a promise from the creators to more squarely focus on the original 6 cast members, which does instill me with some semblance of hope, but it's of a cautious variety due to the reasons I gave above. I hope it's good, and that's really all I can do. Thank you all so much for watching all the way to the end. This is my first foray into the world of TV analysis. I hope I did the show and the medium justice, no pun intended. If you could leave me a like and a comment, it would be very much appreciated. And if Phantoms has enough to talk about, I'd love to make a follow-up video for it, so stay tuned. Until the end, my friends.